NASA scientist Peter Kalmus, alongside scientists and environmental activists across the globe, held protests at the beginning of April to address the fact that corporations and governments are not doing enough to slow climate change, and they were arrested. In 2015, the Paris Agreement was established to set goals for countries to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Fast forward to 2022, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that the increasing emissions will present a global environmental threat in the next few years because countries have not limited their emissions. Now, apart from public activism, there has not been enough pressure on the largest drivers of climate change, large corporations, to be environmentally conscious. That's where a carbon tax comes in, addressing the economic side of climate change. A carbon tax is a tax or fine applied to carbon emissions per ton and on carbon-intensive goods and services. It aims to place responsibility on larger polluters, discouraging activities that contribute to climate change and encouraging renewable energy industries. While establishing carbon taxes as an economic solution can be ineffective in immediately addressing climate change because of a focus on economic incentives rather than mitigation, ultimately carbon taxes incentivize individuals and corporations to limit their carbon footprint through defining climate change by objective means. Placing a negative value on emissions inherently creates an economy focused on climate solutions. Therefore, the United States should establish a national carbon tax in order to reach its goals, because an environmentally progressive society needs to have an economic foundation to be successful. The issue with an economically beneficial approach to climate solutions is the practicality of its implementation. Eric Toder, an Institute Fellow and Co-Director from Tax Policy Center, argues that the cost of renewable energy have fallen dramatically in recent years, and new investments to drive these costs down further will make clean energy competitive even without carbon pricing. And unlike higher prices for US consumers, lower costs of alternative energy will encourage their adoption everywhere. He encourages a focus on renewable energy technologies and policies, since business methods such as carbon offsetting allows larger establishments to bypass certain regulations, causing carbon taxes to become ineffective due to their dependency on an ideal climate-centered economy. Although, carbon taxes inherently support renewable energy by deterring consumers and corporations away from carbon-emitting activities. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that a carbon tax starting at $20 per ton and increasing to $34.40 per ton in 10 years could have raised $1.2 trillion. This revenue can be returned back to Americans by funding renewable energy programs and assisting with damages caused by climate change. While the issue of climate change is not immediately satisfied by placing a tax on emissions, there is insurance built for the development of lasting technologies and policies to support a climate-focused future. Even as carbon taxes are regressive, disproportionately affecting low-income citizens who spend more of their earnings on necessities, they can be equitable solutions when the revenue generated by the taxes are returned to low-income citizens, and allowing the taxes to be implemented gradually will allow there to be a longer adjustment period for both the public and for corporations to work towards renewable energy. An economic solution such as carbon taxes is needed to address climate change because of how human activities affecting the environment are centered around economic demands. By shifting the demand and supply of energy production away from fossil fuels through taxes, renewable energy can be better funded and easily accessible. Climate solutions that better represent a growing economic world are a necessity to implementing global solutions, and carbon taxes are the foundational funding and incentives for a climate-conscious society. Let's take a look at some of the other countries that have already implemented carbon taxes or plan to. In both Canada and Britain, gradually increasing taxes per ton over several years has led to a significant decrease in carbon emissions. In Australia, an initial price of $22 was brought down to $10 due to backlash from industry groups and voters, and this has resulted in a minimal reduction of emissions. Yet, in the United States, only a few states have adopted local carbon pricing markets. In California, the cap-and-trade system, where a limit is set on emissions and carbon credits can be bought and sold, has been set at a modest level. In order to be effective, carbon taxes need to be at a high enough rate while still making accommodations for low-income citizens. Carbon tax revenue must be returned to the public in forms of renewable energy infrastructure or tax dividends, and it must be made easier on the public to make those sustainable choices. People should continue to be environmentally conscious because this creates a demand for renewable energy. The fact is that corporations like JP Morgan Chase, where the recent protests took place at the bank that has invested the most in fossil fuels, are not persuaded by scientific facts. Therefore, climate change must be addressed from an economic perspective, where governments backed by the support of voters place responsibility on the polluters and use carbon taxes to progress an environmentally conscious society.